So lads, what's the story? Topic of today's video, how much fat can you actually lose in the space of just 1 month? Jumping straight in, the first thing that you're going to have to figure out is what your maintenance calories actually are. Now ideally you've already been tracking calories for a good while and you're already going to know where your maintenance is before you try and go ahead with this 4-week power push. If not and you're starting from scratch and you've got 1 month from say a holiday or some sort of photo shoot that you want to look in tip top shape for, use a calorie calculator online. It's going to give you a decent estimate of what your maintenance calories will be. The next question to ask yourself is how much of a deficit should you really be aiming for? For me personally, I'm required to eat 3,400 calories a day to maintain my current body weight. Anything over that I'm going to be gaining weight, anything under that I'm going to be losing weight. So most of the time when it comes to cutting, you're going to want to start off small, although in the case of this we're just going for 1 month. So maybe there'll be that bit of a necessity to go a little bit more aggressive with the calorie deficit than you usually would, or you would ideally like to. So 0 to 10% calorie deficit for me, at least there, will be looking like something from a 0 to 340 calories of a deficit. As I said, it's best to start off small if you're doing a long-term cut and giving yourself plenty of time for it. Although when it comes to trying to maximise the amount of fat that you can lose in 1 month, that's probably not realistically much of a deficit to even notice much of a difference at all really in the space of 1 month. A 10 to 20% deficit is a lot more ideal for a shorter time frame. So in our case here, we're working with a 1 month time frame. Now you should always know that the higher the deficit is, the less sustainable it's going to be. So between 10 and 20% of my maintenance calories will be what, between 340 and 680. So that's a decent enough calorie deficit. Our most aggressive option then, and I definitely wouldn't go above 30%. We've got the one at the bottom here, between 20 and 30% of a calorie deficit. So for me, this would be looking like between 680 and 920 or something like that as a deficit, or maybe 1020 actually. Quick maths right there. Now this much of a deficit for pretty much anyone, it's going to be a very short term measure. You're not going to be able to sustain this for a very long period of time, but it can be good to really dial in for a short enough period of time and then come out of that and give yourself a bit of a diet break after going so intense with it. So obviously with the biggest calorie deficit here, it's going to warrant the fastest rate of fat loss. Just know if you're sustaining a very aggressive calorie deficit for a long enough period of time, so anything over than 3 or 4 weeks with this much of a deficit, you're definitely running the risk of losing a little bit of muscle mass. When you're in this much of a deficit, you're going to notice the quality of your workouts straight away really coming down. And once you're doing a couple of things right, like keeping your protein intake on point and really high, absolutely making the most out of your sleep each night, and continuing on with your regular weight training, trying to maintain as much strength as you can. All them 3 factors working in conjunction together, even with a very aggressive deficit, is going to try and minimise the amount of muscle that you're losing. But sometimes, to be honest, it's just unavoidable when you've got that really sharp deficit. In terms of targets for your macronutrients, what I would say if you're doing a month-long cut, you're obviously going to be a bit more aggressive with your calorie deficit than you would be if you're going long-term, as we discussed before. I would definitely try and keep that protein intake on the higher side. So usually it would be around 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So say I weigh 80 kg, I'd be aiming for in and around 160 grams of protein a day. Now that's usually now when I'm not in a really sharp calorie deficit, so whether I'm bulking or cutting, that's usually what I'd be aiming for. In the case of cutting the calories a lot more, I would bump up the protein even that little bit more. For one thing, it's going to fill you up more, and for another, it's going to help massively with maintaining your muscle mass. As I've said dozens of times before on here, fats and carbs don't matter so much when it comes to body composition, but I would advise not cutting either out. They're still essential for your health, just not as important as protein and calories will be when it comes to body composition. They're the key things you really always want to be looking out for. The ways of actually getting yourself into a calorie deficit, there's a couple of them. Number one, and the simplest, most self-explanatory one, is just eating less calories. Someone who's trying to eat less calories right off the bat would suggest a couple of things, not least of which would be trying to make some smart food swaps. Say for example you're eating chicken thighs maybe once a week, just swap it out for chicken breast and bang, you've probably saved yourself 100 or 200 calories just like that. You're still eating chicken, tastes more or less the same, just a bit less fat, so it's a bit less calorie dense. Other things like having a lot of butter on your foods, cooking your foods in a lot of oil as well. They're all easy swaps you can make to straight away cut down that calorie intake and make things a lot easier for yourself when you're trying to cook. You can also use other methods to try and help fill yourself up a lot more. So like I mentioned before, keeping your protein intake is going to help you keep satiated throughout the day. Protein is more satiating than carbohydrates and fats are, which means it's going to fill you up more. Also trying to prioritise your sleep is going to help reduce food cravings, especially for things like sugar. Second way of getting into a deficit, probably the easiest in my opinion, is just increasing your daily movement, i.e. getting more steps in. A lot of people will try and talk about what's the magic number for steps, how many steps should you be getting in a day. In my opinion, there's not really a magic number. always depends on the person. What you can do is see how many steps a day you're getting at the minute. Say it's 8,000, maybe increase it by 2,000 a day on average. Now there'll be some days where you're very busy, you won't get as many steps in, but keep it as a weekly average. If you come a little under that, maybe 6,000 one day of the week, you know you're going to have to get a little bit more in one of the other days of the week, so don't let that lower day kind of bog you down. And it's just a logical process from there. If you think it's feasible and manageable for you to increase your steps from week to week, go for it. You're going to be burning more calories, going to make your deficit a lot easier. Last one then, and probably the most time consuming one and can be a bit of a pain in the bollocks as well, is doing more cardio at the gym. So when you're in a deficit and trying to cut, always keep your weight training the same. Don't cut the volume or anything. Just because you're now in a fat loss phase doesn't mean you trade out all your weight training for cardio. Keep your weight training the same and you can add some cardio on top of that. So again, this is a completely logical process. Start out with one session a week, maybe if you think it's feasible and manageable for you. Again, like I mentioned with the steps before, then you can increase to 2-3 cardio sessions a week. In terms of what cardio you're doing and what's the best for fat loss, doesn't really matter. Once you enjoy it and it's getting your heart rate up and sustaining the high for a long enough period of time, that's pretty much ticking the only 2 boxes you need to tick when it comes to cardio. I suggest trying to do something enjoyable, and a lot of the time cardio you can bring kind of a community aspect into it. You could do group classes, you could join a running club, you could join a martial arts club, you could start playing football again, whatever it may be. For the best results here of getting into a deficit, I'd combine all 3. So like I said, logically analysing the situation week by week. If you think it's feasible for you to do more, do more. One thing I wouldn't do is drastically cut your calories straight away. So cut the calories by a little bit, increase your steps, and if you're doing an extra cardio session a week in the gym, you're going to be putting yourself into even more of a calorie deficit than you're actually cutting with the calories, if that makes sense, because you're doing the more movement with your steps and because you're getting the cardio session or 2 in as well during the week. So the answer to the question, how much fat can you lose in the space of 1 month? Like anything, it depends. 1 month isn't really a lot of time when it comes to fitness. You've always heard that it's a marathon and not a sprint, and that couldn't be more the truth. However, 1 month I think is definitely enough to see noticeable changes. Now the rate of progress that you see in this month-long power push that you're doing is ultimately going to depend on how strict your deficit is. So that's how much you're cutting your calories by, how much more movement you're doing throughout the day, how much more cardio you're doing. What gets measured gets managed. Track your body weight and make sure your weight is dropping on a week by week basis. Get the average for the week and compare it each Sunday maybe. Sometimes your weight is going to go up from one day to the next just because of slight fluctuations. Don't look too much into that. You could do everything right from the second you wake up to the second you go to bed, but your weight could still miraculously be gone up that little bit from what it was the previous day, even if you're in a deficit. Fat loss or fat gain isn't going to happen over the space of a day. We're talking weeks and months for fat gain and fat loss. You might be storing more water, more glycogen in your body. There's some of the potential reasons your weight could go up from one day to the next. Other factors include quality of your sleep, stress, and a number of other things. Now just know, in the first week or 2 you'll see very fast results on the scale. Your weight is going to drop a lot if you are cutting the calories. Reason for this being, your body's going to be storing less glycogen simply because you're going to be eating less food. Therefore your body's going to be holding on to less water, and you're going to ultimately have less undigested food in your system. So your weight is going to go down quite quickly, and then it will start to taper off and get that little bit slower, but don't be alarmed by that. Just make sure you're aware of that initial drop you're going to see. And that's pretty much it for the video. So I know it's not a conclusive answer, and the answer is really with everything when it comes to fitness, it just depends. But I hope this gave you an overview and hopefully a good approach as well if you have a situation like this arising for yourself where you're looking to really maximise your fat loss in the space of 1 month. And as always, any questions, just shoot them over to me on Instagram or leave a comment on the video. Make sure you subscribe if you like the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.